in the UU tradition that I was in for a long time before hopping ship to progressive Christianity, we had sort of a talk back after the sermon or the service, so I welcome opinions and objections as much as questions.
I have one to just kind of kick off.
Sure.
In the Venn diagram of people who follow Jesus by doing the things Jesus asked us to do, and the other circle being people who believe Christianity is all about just believing, we've got to divide. Those two don't seem to overlap. They're hardly a Venn diagram. They're like separate, impenetrable circles sometimes. And it's not that I don't believe that believing things are important, because what I believe is that we put love first. But it just seems that there's very little dialogue possible between those two. And how, from the perspective of your book or just off the cuff, where can we be in dialogue with people who seem to be virtually practicing a different religion than we are?
I mean, if I had an answer for that question, the world would be so much better, and we would all be happy.
Okay. Next question.
But in all seriousness, I think that this is a really interesting inflection point in the question of what we are to do about talking to our enemies. I mean, that question, just as a question, should we try to talk to people who think the current administration is doing a fabulous job? And if we are trying to talk to them, how do we talk to them, and what does that even mean? And because I am kind of a Facebook nut, I have seen an incredibly wide range of opinions about this, everything from, yes, Jesus would have us, try to talk to these people and possibly overturn some tables in the temple, but at a minimum, try to engage. And then I've seen plenty of people who say, and actually the progressive blogger John Pavlovitz is a good example of this, that there's a time to burn bridges. I mean, he literally, his Substack this morning was about burning bridges because you are on fire with the truth, which is an interesting bringing together of ideas. So I think that individuals have to make this decision themselves. There are people who really are in targeted groups for whom it is literally unsafe to try to have these conversations, and I would not. In a sense, I'm in one of those groups. In a sense, I'm not in the most targeted groups. But it has to be an individual decision. This much I think I can say: if we try to talk to those people, it has to be with somehow a genuine curiosity about what they're on about, to use David's language. So if I were going to talk to one of those people, even though what I would really want to say is, why are you trying to take away my rights and destroy this country I love? Like, that's what I'd like to say. But what I think I actually would say is, tell me how you came to see things the way you see them now. Who did you learn that from, and how did that come to be? And here's another one. If you got everything you wanted, if the current administration did everything you wanted, how would your life change from what it is right now? And then, what do you want people who disagree with you to know about you and to know about how you think about this? So I think there are some genuinely sort of Jesus-style compassionate questions we can ask if we are in a space to do that. But that would require practically a Buddhist level of non-attachment to the outcome, Now, I do also think Jesus practiced a kind of non-attachment, just not particularly a Buddhist one, because that wouldn't have been his background. But so if we're going to ask those questions, it has to be, I think, out of a place of humility and vulnerability. And we have to realize that we're not asking them so that our minds will be changed. We're asking them so that we can, I'm really sorry to put it this way, but try to be better human beings than some of them are trying to be, I do go back to that old, when they go low, we go high. I understand that for sort of protest purposes, that might not be the ideal. But if we're genuinely conversing with people who differ from us, it has to be hauling up as much respect for them as we can find, even if we think they're harming people and even if we disagree. And I'm not saying that's easy, but none of this is easy. So,
help me understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Because I don't live in that world. And
Yeah.
I try to make it neutral, not that I'm better and that's what I'm
Yeah.
coming. But I try to come across as if we're going to have a dialogue, we have to start by understanding each other. And so when you coach it that way, I usually do get an answer. Now, it's not this. And the hard part is to keep the face that says, I'm hearing you, rather than the one that says, God, here we go.
Right, right. Good point.
I don't necessarily have a question, but what I found out interesting listening to you this morning when we're talking about this very subject was your comment that we don't have to like them.
Right,
We can help them flourish.
right. Now, I am not convinced that Jesus would actually have agreed with that point. You know, I suspect that when Jesus said, love your enemies, he did mean something that involved the heart and the emotions, maybe a little more than I mean. But as I was working on this project, when that way of thinking about loving enemies sort of came clear to me, I thought, well, for some of us, trying to genuinely love them in the most emotionally connective sense really might be a bridge too far, but we can actually work for their well-being. And so for me, this approach in some ways is actually more modest. The next book I would like to write is actually called How to Love Our Enemies, and it expands this idea that we love our enemies by helping them flourish. But it can't hurt if we do whatever our spiritual work is to try to release some of our rage or, you know, however triggered we may be by them. So that can't hurt, but I think at a minimum, this kind of practical work is definitely in keeping with things I think Jesus did and supported. So it's a start. Yeah, sure.
How do you deal with those who only want to look at the Bible as a literal translation, not what Jesus wanted you to do?
Well, so this is one of those places where it's really handy that I happen to be a Jew by heritage, because Jews did not read the Torah literally. Jews did not read the prophets literally. Jews did not read the writings. Those are the three parts of the Hebrew Bible. If you read, say, medieval commentaries from Jewish scholars on the Torah, you'll see that the commentaries take up, imagine a blank page, and then imagine that the commentary is kind of in the middle of the page and there's a lot of white space around it. And those scholars left all that white space because there would be commentaries on the commentaries. And then there would be commentaries on the commentaries on the commentaries, and so on and so on. So there is a really long, rich Jewish tradition of wrestling with Scripture, just as the Scripture tells us that Jacob wrestled with God and got a new name. And in the same way, Jews have wrestled with God for millennia. And I think, from starting out as a non-observant Jew, becoming a UU, becoming a progressive Christian, the wrestling to me is very central. I do get that a lot of people have been raised with a really different understanding of the Bible, and that does make it extremely hard because, and there's some wonderful writing about this from back in kind of the 90s when I was first reading progressive Christian literature. How you read the Bible actually winds up setting all these other sort of expectations and parameters. And so, again, if you look at what Jesus said and did, he seems to have taken some liberties with his own scripture. There's plenty of stories about him healing on the Sabbath, which is not unheard of in the Jewish tradition, but certainly is not common because healing was understood as work and you don't work on the Sabbath and so on. So for me, the question about how to read the Bible also comes down to, do you care about what Jesus said and did in his life, or do you really care about the sort of transactional, I accept him as my Lord and Savior, and therefore I'm good forever, I'm going to heaven, I'm done. And again, that has not been my story, that version of it. I do understand the appeal. I mean, life is chaotic, things change. The idea that there's this stable, simple solution is really tempting. I see that as a temptation. I think Jesus avoided temptation, and we should avoid it too. So I know that's not quite a clear answer to your question, but I think unless, I have tried to have conversations with biblical literalists, and I mean, I've had them for decades, and they generally go nowhere. So I'm still happy to have them if one of them wants to have one with me, but I gotta say, I wish I had a solution to that. Yeah, sure. Please, go ahead. Oh, okay, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time being involved in trying to change the things in the life. And in Colorado for 60 years, I worked in politics very much. I found it paid off. The whole transformation of the state from being very Republican to being very Democratic.
Yep.
And I found also there's values in contributing to political candidates. Now I'm caught in a terrible dilemma because every day I'm getting at least 10 requests for money. And I have no idea for sure what it's going to, because they say, you do this and we'll save Medicare. Wait a minute.
Right.
If I do this in 5 days, we're going to save Medicare?
Right.
What do you do now? Here I am 85 and I'd like to do as much as I can, but I'm kind of limited.
So I think the way I'm going to answer that is by quoting Frederick Buechner, a wonderful, I'm not sure I would exactly call him a progressive Christian, but a very thoughtful Christian writer, who is credited with saying, and I'm not going to get the words exactly right, the thing to do is to find out where kind of your deep joy, your deep gifts meet the world's deep needs or deep hunger. And that's sort of your mission in the world, is to bring your joy and your gifts to the deep need. Now, that sounds like no answer at all initially, I understand that. But if you, I would parse that then in two ways for your question. One of them is, what is your single biggest pain point of all the horror show things going on right now? Like, yeah, it's a giant dumpster fire, but what corner of the dumpster fire is breaking your heart the most? That would be where to donate your spare money, if you have spare money, which plenty of us do not have. But so that's sort of one answer. To the other part, this business about if you send money, we will magically stop what the administration is doing. No, we won't. I mean, I understand that the Democratic Party's all caps, eternally urgent emails about things are their strategy right now, and I am a lifelong Democrat because I don't see a better alternative that is realistic in the world we live in. If I did, I'd be whatever that was. But I think that might be noise. So I guess you don't have to listen to this. You might not agree with me. That's fine. But I think I would hew back to that that idea that there's going to be your deepest pain point or your deepest cause for optimism, and that's what you focus on. All of us have to cope with really limited bandwidths at this point in time. Many of us have personal things going on, and even those of us who don't have bandwidth-robbing personal things going on are dealing with this insanely chaotic world where they are fire hosing us with horror, which is exactly their plan. That is exactly how they set it up. And so none of us can do everything, and I believe they are hoping that that means some of us will do nothing. So none of us can do everything. They would like all of us to do nothing. What that means is all of us must do something, however little. So find your pain point or find the thing that brings you really deep joy and figure out how to support it. And I mean, if that's probably the only advice I can give you. Yeah. Sure, go ahead.
So I found a lot of value when you said you don't have to lose for me to win.
Right.
Because so much of just like love your enemies, it's still oppositional.
Yeah.
And that is a hard thing to live in. I'm sure there's many of us who have members of our family who are on the opposite political scale. And so, I mean, we're all dealing with that.
Right.
And if you approach it from not a either or, but a both,
Right.
then I think you're more likely to have a conversation rather than, everyone getting their feelings and
Yep.
So I really appreciate that.
So I want to talk to a really interesting paradox for me that's brought up by what you say. You know, the book is called Abundant Lives, and of course that's a takeoff from the image in John of the Gospel of John about Jesus coming so that people might have abundant life. And of course, in John's context, that's mostly spiritual, but we can expand it to all the different human capacities, you know, embodied, emotional, relational, meaning-making, all the things. So the opposite of abundance is scarcity. And part, I think, of loving our enemies, and I mean, I'm terrible at doing this, so listen to what I say, but don't do what I do, right? Because I don't do this very well, but I can think about it pretty competently. Loving our enemies means trying to replace our scarcity mindset with an abundance mindset. And that can sound kind of new agey and woo-woo, but I really don't mean it that way. I really mean, you know, Jesus clearly had an abundance mindset. I mean, however else we want to describe that, you know, he kept thinking that more things were possible than the people around him thought were possible, and he had creative ways to make good trouble. And he, you know, I could go on. I won't go on with that. But so this notion of abundance versus scarcity. If we can engage our nemesis from a place of abundance, which is super hard, but if we can do whatever spiritual work it takes to do that, I think that is the only hope we have, because then they might actually see our light, so to speak, that we are not hiding under a bushel, and it is not necessarily the light of a doctrine, it's literally the light of the abundance of the love of God, however we understand that. So, why did I just say that was kind of paradoxical? Because we are trying to bring our sense of abundance to their narratives that I think are all scarcity driven. To me, and this is another one of the books I'd like to write, everything I see when I look as a progressive person, as a sociologist, as a person of progressive faith, when I look at the right-wing sort of cultural tradition now, it's all driven by scarcity. These people are out to get your jobs. These people are a danger to you. You know, if you vote for the Democrats, you're voting for them. If you vote for me, you're voting for us. I mean, there's tons and tons of this. So we have to somehow bring our abundance to their scarcity and model what abundance looks like. And again, it's not that I'm good at doing that, but I am pretty clear that that is the way to think about it. If we have access to that abundance, and again, so the book actually has a chapter about the work we can do as individuals to sort of be equipped to do this. So I talk about psychological healing, I talk about spiritual disciplines, and you know, there's work we do individually, there's work we do collectively as religious communities, there's work we do in social movements, but all of it is about grounding ourselves in that abundance, at which point we can go to people with scarcity narratives and say, I have so much abundance that I can listen to you. I have so much abundance that I can ask why you think that. I have so much abundance that I can listen to you explain why you want to personally take my rights away. And in that sentence, by the way, I'm talking as a queer person, so I do mean my rights. And this will sound, I hope, like not too odd an analogy, but if you think about whether it, you know, historically happened or not, if you think about the notion of Jesus forgiving his enemies from the cross, what is more abundant than that, right? However we make sense of that story, that's the kind of abundance I would like to have in my own life. The abundance to forgive the people who are harming me, to listen to them, to be compassionate toward them, to work for their well-being in ways that don't hurt my well-being, because again, ideally this is not either or. So when I have progressed past not thinking nasty thoughts about them in my head, I will let you all know, you know, but I think that's sort of the direction.
Is there more questions?
Yeah, anything else? Anyone else?
I appreciate the abundance, but usually my prayer is that I have enough. I have enough because I have a place to live. I have food to eat.
Right.
I have friends and family.
Yep.
And I think that's maybe what their problem is they don't feel like they have enough.
Right. That's really insightful, and to me,
You're
that
talking
is-
about Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, right? They don't have enough.
well,
They don't feel like they have enough.
But actually, David, I'm going to push back on you a little bit. I think there is a sense in which they genuinely don't have enough because they have this scarcity mindset. So it will never matter how much they have, it will never be enough. That's what I mean. Yeah. Okay, so yeah. So yeah, I mean, any of us, no matter how much or how little we have some degree of choice how we make sense of our lives, and it may not be easy for us to view our lives as abundant, but that is something we can practice. And this also, by the way, doesn't mean that if we literally do not have enough to eat or do not have, I'm not proposing that someone who genuinely is lacking in survival resources has to have this particular way of thinking. I mean, my congregation has quite a ministry to unhoused people in Colorado Springs. And these are people who do not have enough. They are people who frequently are dealing with mental illness or active drug addiction or alcoholism. So we are seeing them in places of profound physical and emotional and spiritual scarcity. And it would just be cruel for me to say to someone like that, oh, just get a better attitude, right? That's horrible. No. We put money in our basket. The basket at my church is a three-way basket, so put money in if you have it, bless the basket if you have nothing, take money out if you need it. We do that every week. I'm really proud of us for that. So it's not that this works for everyone, but my guess is that many of us in this room right now are at least okay. We're at least above, survival. So I think we can, and the other thing about abundance and scarcity is I think the current administration is messaging people who support them who really might not entirely have enough and whose lives the administration is currently making harder. I mean, the administration is making their lives harder just as much as it's making many of our lives harder, in some cases even more so. But the administration is telling them, the message is, we are going to give you abundance by taking things away from other people. And so again, we need to keep coming back to, if we are trying to put love first, if we're trying to follow Jesus, the goal is to comprehend and be genuinely grateful for the abundance we do have, and to the extent that we can learn how to do this, and it's so hard, act out of that abundance, and then engage with those people who are convinced they don't have enough, and then let us be light and bread and hope and whatever we might need to be to them. And maybe some of them will look at our light shining, maybe some, don't know, and be inspired to go, you have something that I want. I mean, that is what actually got me into progressive Christianity. I mean, I even went to seminary to be a UU minister, but there came a point when I said, UUism doesn't have what I want, and progressive Christianity does, and here I am. So if we're our best selves, to the extent that we can be, even with those people who wish us harm, sometimes maybe we'll make a little bit of a difference. So, yeah. Any other questions? Sure, yeah.
Thank you. These are insightful comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you equate fear and scarcity? Do you see them as different? A lot of people seem to be afraid,
Right. That's super complicated. I think that fear can be fear of scarcity. Sometimes it's absolutely that, and in that case, they're really deeply connected. But we can be afraid of a lot of things that are not on their face about scarcity. I'm going through a personal time in my life in which I'm being forced to confront almost 60 years worth of personal demons, which is not the most fun thing I've ever done. But and maybe, people's demons are different, so I can't speak to this, but something I've noticed as I try to sit with them and, offer to have some tea with my demons and all that, a lot of them really are scarcity demons. So I think that, the fear around them often seems to be a fear of scarcity. The one place where I would have to think about it more is when we are afraid of people who are very different from us, there might be sort of a scarcity component to that, in the idea that only someone can be right, and therefore if I'm right, those people must be wrong. So maybe there's some fear there. But I think there is sort of a fear of difference that is more primal in our brain than the fear of scarcity. You know, you're not really worried about how much you have to eat when literally a predator is chasing you and you are like a pre-Homo sapiens person. When your amygdala goes off and says, danger, 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 your amygdala thinks you're about to get eaten by, you know, some kind of big animal. I'm cautious about calling that a scarcity issue. But what I think is helpful, so one of the other things, in my anti-racism training, I do a lot of work around white discomfort. I try to help white people get comfortable with their discomfort about racial issues. And so I talk about this amygdala thing a lot. If our amygdala thinks that we are in danger, it will trigger and make us fearful, even if the only thing that happened is, you know, I'm giving an anti-racism training and I just said something cringeworthy and some person of color called me out. And my amygdala goes, danger, danger, danger. Well, no, I'm in no danger at all, but I understand why my amygdala is doing that. So that's a case in which there is a kind of fear, but it's not actually a rational or reasonable fear. So I think the other way to work on fear and scarcity is to try to understand which of our fears are actually reasonable, relevant, meaningful, plausible, you know. I think I can genuinely stand up here and say I'm afraid I will lose certain legal rights within the next year or two. Like I don't think that's my amygdala saying that a predator's chasing me. I think that's me reading the news. But sometimes our amygdala really is not helping us. And so sometimes we really have to sort out, do I need to be afraid of this or not? And when that question comes up, the question about scarcity is a great way into that. So I know that's a long-winded answer, but I think that's how I'd address that. Any others?
Yeah, I wanted to see if I could engage your wordsmith and sociologist hat and kind of do a riff on the topic of language. Because as many of us know, the federal government is actively purging all government websites and documents from not only words like diversity, equity, and inclusion, but words like women and race and racism and gay, which some of you know has meant that all of the photographs and articles about the Enola Gay, the bomb-dropping bomber, have been wiped off of federal websites. I mean, it's just basically, you know, a find all, delete kind of thing. So I get it because I have a lot of friends and some family members who are conservative, and they get really worked up over language. And like a perfect one, we've been knocking it around today, the word unhoused versus homeless, and how that has sent several people I know into paroxysms of rage. Like, now you're changing homeless people to unhoused people? And it's like, and I try to explain to them about you're acknowledging their condition and not their being, you know, and that's something that's really not anything they'd considered before. So say some more about that. Like, how do we decide to move from homeless to unhoused for the dignity of other people, and all the other words that we have tried to adopt in church, in liturgy, in our everyday lives? Small question.
So I'm afraid that by the time I'm done answering that full question, it will be time for the sound check for the concert. So I can't do that, but I'll try to do a little bit. One of my other, so I have many side gigs as a trainer and consultant, and one of them is, as David mentioned, I consult with congregations that are struggling to move toward more inclusive liturgy. And in fact, I'm literally just off a 2 Zoom project with a Sarasota church, which is interesting. So the thing about language, to put on the sociology hat, we are meaning-making creatures. I mentioned that in the talk. And we need to make sense of our surroundings and understand how the world works, and language is kind of the way we do that. Without language, we can make no meaning. So the language we use matters, and the language we use can help or heal. It can lead to abundance or scarcity. Controlling language is something that dictatorships and fascist societies do all the time and very well. Everyone go back and reread 1984 if you haven't already in the past 8 years. But so how should we think about it? Well, I've only so far come up with a couple of small thoughts. In private, when we are among friends, we must keep all the language alive that the government does not wish to use. So we must be saying trans, and we must be saying DEI, and we must be saying queer, and we must be saying women, and we must be saying inclusion, and all of that stuff. Like these are like cultural traditions we have to keep alive. That's a little more anthropological than sociological, but so there's that piece. I'm really interested in ways of thinking about inclusiveness that don't require us to lose the forbidden language, to use the forbidden language. So an organization that tries to support inclusiveness in school settings asked me to do some consulting for them, which I wasn't able to. But in thinking about their situation, what they wanted was a training on why it's more important than ever to double down on DEI language. And I mean, I believe that, I agree with that, but I'm not sure that's the right strategy for the moment. So if we think about, there are kind of two underground railroads in our country's history that I think are very interesting. One of them obviously is the slavery one. The other one, which is somewhat less well known, is the abortion access one, in which progressive clergy largely were responsible for getting women access to reproductive health care before Roe v. Wade. So I have been thinking recently a lot about the idea of an underground railroad of ideas. Can we use language that somehow does not trigger them while meaning what we already mean? And I don't have clear answers, but can we actually reclaim language that they use? So with the whole DEI business, one of the terms that has come up a lot in dear colleague letters and in executive orders and things like that has been the idea of sort of returning to a system of merit. Well, anyone who knows anything about racism and sexism knows that the old system had no merit. It was, mediocre white guys getting jobs and no one else getting jobs. And the white guys in question there, with apologies to all white guys in this room right now, didn't have to be particularly qualified. They had to be white. It helped if they were well off and had some social connections, but it wasn't really about merit. So can we take their language of merit and make it mean something other than what they think it means? Can we use their own language against them? And I think and this is all I'm going to say about this in the interest of time, my model there is actually my own community reclaiming the word queer. I mean, almost everyone older than me who is lesbian or gay hates the word queer. It was used only and always as an insult. It's very painful. I came of age at a point when the word was starting to be used descriptively, not even necessarily to mean someone off the beaten path, but just someone who wasn't heterosexual. So for me, it's sort of this descriptive term. It is not a hostile term. It's just a descriptive term. It has been made to mean something different than what it used to mean. And so one thing I'm thinking about, and don't have great answers yet, is can we use their language for our purposes? And again, I think we see in some of the stories of Jesus interacting with Pharisees, we see some trickery and some flipping of terms and some creativity in forcing engagements with reality that are good models there. The story of the coin with Caesar's head on it is a good one. And in fact, we even have a story where someone used that successfully against Jesus, which is the story of the either Canaanite or Syrophoenician woman, whichever version you like, where Jesus said something horrible and she said, "Yes, Lord," and then she got him by using his own language against him. So, and against, I know that sounds very enemy-like, but these people really, I think it's okay to call them our enemies. I think they are our enemies. Can we use their language against them somehow? I don't know, but that's what I'm thinking about.
Can we say thank you to Amanda?